Okay, welcome to Standards and Assessment, everyone. Thanks. This always feels a little bit like magic that this happens, and I know it's not. So thank you, everyone who makes it happen and all the many hours staff and our tech people put in to make it happen. Let's quickly just do a roll call and make sure we're all here and our microphones work. And just tell us who you are and what district you represent. And I suppose if you want to say anything else, you can too. So I am Jenny Gravitt, and I represent District 4, which is parts of Weber and Davis County. I saw that Board Member Earl is having trouble with audio, so we'll go back to her. Board Member Hanson, do you want to go ahead and tell us who you are?
Good morning, Scott Hanson, District 2, which is Ogden Inner City and parts of Weber County. Just glad to be here this morning. Thanks, Jenny.
Glad to have you. Board Member Cannon?
Good morning. Nice to see you. I miss you people.
I know.
Anyway, Board Member Cannon, I represent the parts of Granite District and all of Murray District and Southeast Salt Lake and Central Salt Lake and in the South Salt Lake, that area.
That's a lot of areas.
That's a lot of area.
Well, we represent a lot of people.
I know.
Board Member Marsh.
Good morning. I'm Mark. I represent District 12. I go from Daggett through Uinta, Duchesne, Wasatch, Summit, and a little trail down into the Alpine District in the city limits of Orem.
Oh, wonderful. Good to have you. Board Member Earl, have we had any luck? Can you hear me? Give me a check if you can hear me, or can you not even hear? Okay. Jerry, I wonder if... Okay, I think Jerry's working on it. While we're working on that, I thought that since July is a fun month, and well, maybe some years it's been more fun than others, but when I was thinking to myself, what is the funnest thing I can think of? And if you're thinking to yourself, Jenny, funnest isn't a word. Well, I looked it up, and Grammar Girl says it's a word if you're a youngster, a child, a slacker, or born after 1970. So I fit at least one of those categories, so I can say funnest. So the funnest thing I could think of was grammar. And actually, Janet, I thought of you because you are our little grammar master. And so this is a very fun and serious, well, maybe not serious poem that I just want to share with you all, because even though we're dealing with ideas, we also deal with grammar. So it's on the screen. Feel free to learn from it. It's called The Grammar Lesson. A noun's a thing, a verb's the thing it does. An adjective is what describes the noun. In the can of beets is filled with purple fuzz. Of and with are prepositions. Thus an article. A can's a noun. A noun's a thing. A verb's the thing it does. A can roll. Or not, what isn't was or might be, might meaning not yet known. Our can of beets is filled with purple fuzz is present tense. While words like our and us are pronouns, i.e. it is moldy, they are icky brown. A noun's a thing, a verb's the thing it does. Is a helping verb. It helps because filled isn't a full verb. Can's what our owns. In our can of beets is filled with purple fuzz. See, there's almost nothing to it. Just memorize these rules or write them down. A noun's a thing, a verb's the thing it does. The can of beets is filled with purple fuzz. I don't know, Janet, it just made me think of you. But anyway, I hope it made you guys laugh.
It made me laugh, and I'm friends with Carol Spatman Moss.
Oh yes,
and you made a comment saying, Carol, I knew this wasn't you because it was grammatically incorrect, and I thought, yay, Jenny, she's right on top of it. English teacher's rule.
Yes, and I just saw Dr. Norman just commented, I think I saw something like, this is why math is better. And I don't know, grammar is pretty mathematical, and it's the reason
it's true.
So anyway, thanks for humoring me all. Board Member Earl, did we get you on? Let me look at the comments. Does anyone have any information on Board Member Earl?
Let me call her.
Oh, thank you so much, Patty. I think maybe we'll get started because we have a quorum, and then we will hope to get her, and maybe she can call in, but we will make it work. And I guess here we go. Our first item of business is the alternate achievement science standards. And as you guys know, IDEA requires that we have these alternate achievement science standards. And so we're going to have Tanya Semerad talk to us about what these are, ask her questions, and then hopefully see what we can do to take some action.
Can you hear me?
Yes, there you are.
Yes. Hi, everybody. Tanya Semerad. I am the Autism Cognitive Disability Specialist at the USBE. And yes, we have been working on pulling a stakeholder group together. You may recall I came before you in December mentioning that, just as an informational item, that we were pulling a stakeholder group together to update our science standards, or to give a recommendation for that with the new SEED science standards that had just been approved. So we did that in December. We brought stakeholders from across Utah, teachers of this population, which are significant cognitive disability students. And we had educators who represented rural areas, charter schools. We even had a virtual charter school that joined us, larger districts as well. And these are really those teachers that are working directly with this population. So they are recommending, and we're bringing 2 action items to you based on their recommendation today, that we adopt the dynamic learning maps, essential elements for science. We have used the dynamic learning maps, essential elements for mathematics and English language arts since 2009. And now we have an opportunity to use their science standards. So that's the first action that we're asking today, is to adopt those based on their recommendations. And the second is that we are asking that we can pull together a writing group for some of the standards that we need to write that are missing, that are Utah-specific SEED standards. And so we don't want to leave, this population is a challenging and unique population, but we don't want to leave them out of having access to those Utah standards as well. So we've got 2 things we're asking for today, and I'm willing to answer any other questions you might have.
Okay, thank you so much. And before we open it up to questions, can you talk to me just a little bit about what the benefits of using the dynamic learning maps is?
Sure. So the reason, I think one of the main reasons that the stakeholder group is recommending that we go with these standards, as I mentioned before, we're already using the standards for Ela and Math. And also, we've just contracted with DLM, Dynamic Learning Maps. It was just approved before full board last month as our alternate assessment vendor. So these teachers have experience with these standards and with using this alternate assessment. It makes sense to me, and it made sense to them, that science would fit right into what they're already doing. And for those of you that maybe aren't as familiar with these alternate achievement standards, Dynamic Learning Maps does a really good job of, so alternate achievement standards are directly aligned to our standards. So I want to make sure that people understand we're not creating new standards. They didn't pull these things out of the air. They're directly aligned to the standards that we already have. But it just reduces these standards in breadth, depth, and complexity for this really complex population of students. And then Dynamic Learning Maps even breaks it down further into what they call linkage levels or access points, so that a student, as we talked about Chair Gravitt, we're talking about our most significantly cognitively challenged students. So some of these kids, they don't have the ability to do anything except indicate information through eye gaze, right? And so they break down these standards to the point that kids can actually be making progress that are directly aligned to the standards, but taking into account their cognitive and adaptive disability.
Oh, thank you so much. That's so helpful to understand. I just got word that board member Earl has joined us and she can hear. I just want to check and see if she can speak. Board member Earl.
Can you hear me?
We can. Wonderful.
Okay. I think we're set up. I don't know what the difference was from yesterday to today, but for whatever reason, I have to use headset instead of, I'm sure it's just a click of something, but I tried everything. So
like I said, it feels like
I'm here
to me. So
thank you.
Thank you for being persistent. Do we have any questions for our education specialist, Tanya Semerad? Board member Cannon, go ahead.
Thank you. Tanya, I'm just wondering if you could give us a few examples of where our Utah SEED standards are not addressed by the dynamic learning maps. So apparently we have some things in there that we need to cover through this stakeholder group that will be writing something. Can you just give us some ideas of what topics those might be?
Thank you, Board Member Cannon. I'm not going to be able to speak directly to one specific standard that I can give you for that. I know that, so dynamic learning maps, they are in phase 1 of developing these science standards. And so for expanding the science standards. So actually right now, it's a limited number of standards compared to and I don't have it right in front of me, to the really broad number of standards that we have for our core standards. But dynamic learning maps is in the middle of expanding. And now that we are part of our contract with them for the alternate assessment, we actually get to join in on developing the new standards as they expand. So we do know, and you know, I can absolutely give you more information. I can tell you that Ricky Scott and I have discussed this, and he sent me information about, there's like 18 to 20 standards that they found when they were writing the core SEED standards, that they did a crosswalk that Utah wanted to be addressed specifically, and they were not addressed specifically. So we know that because DLM is not specific Utah writers writing these standards, that there are missing elements to it. The specific ones, I'm sorry, I can't answer you that, but I can certainly get you more information on that if you would like. I don't know if anybody else on the call would have more information about that.
Let me just check and see, is there anybody else on the call that has more specific information? I wonder about Ricky Scott. Well, I don't know why he would be here, but he can help provide more information. Janet, would that be okay? Maybe Tanya could send some stuff to us, or we could get.
Yes, I think that's very helpful. I was just wondering about the uniqueness of Utah, and so having that background is helpful to me. Thank you, Tanya.
It's a great question.
Gravitt?
Yeah.
Or Chair Gravitt, we will have Ricky Scott follow up in an email to all of the committee members.
Oh, excellent. Okay, so we'll have Ricky Scott follow up and send an email, because that's a great question.
He's jumping on it in just a second if you want to give it a minute, or we can come back to it when he gets on, but he's going to pop in here in a second.
Okay, we'll come right back to it as soon as he pops on. In the meantime, I see that Board Member Earl has a question.
Yeah, I have a question as far as these standards would then be used within a special education classroom, or a teacher in the regular class use these in conjunction with her standards or his standards that they're teaching? How can you help me kind of get a picture of how this works?
Sure. Thank you. That's a great question. So again, this is for that population of students with significant cognitive disabilities. So this is our 1% population of students. And it sometimes this is a little confusing and actually even in my position, hard to understand or visualize, but it's not really a place where they learn it. So where they are learning these standards. So I do know that there might be a student in, say, for instance, a charter school who is very complex needs. They are, learning through these alternate standards. They could be in a classroom while the gen ed teacher is teaching to a core standard for science, would have their special ed teacher working on that same standard, but very reduced in terms of the expectation for the standard. But what's been our alternate achievement standards is we finally, and this, it's not just new, it's, we're looking at 10 plus years now, are having high expectations for this population of students. And we are saying, even if it's at the just getting them on the playing field at the very, very basic level of being able to have access to the standards that the rest of our kids are having access to, that we need to be doing that. So I don't know if that answers your question. If you'd like further information, I can answer more.
It does answer my question. I was just wondering how those were weaved in, but it leads to another question, and it gets to I guess there's a point where the functional skills that the specific population we're working with needs versus trying to stay with the same curriculum. So how do we balance that out? Do you know what I'm saying? I agree with the least restrictive environment and being with peers and that kind of a thing. So at what point is it usable for that 1% versus working on things that they can use down the road? Does that make sense what I'm saying? So how do we weigh that out?
Yes. Can I respond to that? Yes. You know what? That is a discussion that my wonderful, dedicated, passionate educators with this population talk about and work through every day. So it's a fantastic point because we do want them to have access to these standards, and we definitely want to have those high expectations. But as you mentioned, building their functional skills is definitely a big priority for this population of students. And so they do have to balance it out. One thing that's really nice about the dynamic learning maps, and I'm always happy to talk about this. So if you want to talk more, I'm happy to outside of this meeting as well. But they have these, that, as I mentioned before, their standards are broken down. And a lot of times the way that they're broken down, it directly does address functional skills. And so, for example, when we are talking about, and I'm going to just throw out a math example. Of course, they need to be able to understand the difference between same and different if they're looking at different coins. And this is, I'm talking about a very, low broken down level. And so you can be accessing a math standard and just be focusing on learning the same and different, and eventually working up towards understanding coins, understanding money. So luckily, I feel like a lot of the essential elements, the way that they're broken down, actually do address those functional skills that you're talking about.
Okay, and then that just leads to one last question. Thank you, though. These really help me understand. If do we have expertise that within our teachers that could write these here in Utah? I guess I'm wanting to make sure that this is something that is it something we need to send out of house to do? Or can we do it within the state itself with the expertise we have there?
Okay, so I'm going to just clarify. Well, first of all, so what the two things we're proposing is that we adopt the DLM Dynamic Learning Maps Essential Elements for Science that are already developed, and they are expanding. But we do need to pull in a group of people, and we want them to be Utah people, to write the standards that are going to address those specific Utah seed standards that DLM just aren't going to be addressing, right? Because they're Utah specific. So absolutely, we have the expertise to do it, and we can pull a work group together. And I think it will be fantastic to pull our educators together to do this.
Tanya,
thank you.
Let me interrupt for a second. You gave me an example when we were kind of preparing for this meeting, and then there's an example uploaded in Civic Clerk. I thought that was so helpful, and I really appreciate it. I'm wondering if you could go through that with the committee.
Sure. So yeah, on Civic Clerk, and I'm still learning how to look at this screen. Jeffrey, if you go, there's another document that just has some pasted and copied. Nope, the next one. Yep. So this is an example of DLM science standard. So if you look, there's the state standard right up there at the very top in the blue, which is complex, right? Develop a model to describe the movement of matter among plants, animals, decomposers, and the environment. So that's complex when you're thinking about this population. So the essential element is broken down. So the target level is the actual essential element. So create a model that shows the movement of matter, which is plant growth, eating, composition through living things. And then it's broken down even further to identify a model that shows the movement of matter from plants to animals. And then at that initial level, that just getting in them on the playing field is just identifying common foods or common human foods. So you can see that it starts at a very basic level that is directly aligned to that core standard. And then what's wonderful about, you can see below, the essential elements also through DLM show us where they connect to science practices, these cross-cutting concepts that we've seen with our seed standards, where they connect to ELA, essential elements and standards, and if there is connection to mathematic essential elements. So it's really broken down wonderfully. And I'm just going to take a minute to tell you that any of our gen ed teachers who have worked with students and understand these alternate achievements love this, because they have students that might not be significant cognitive disabilities, but they need to figure out a place to start them. And they love this sort of backward chaining of really how to help these students get to that state core standard.
Yeah, I agree, because as even a regular ed teacher, these are access points like you kind of talked about, and it just helps with differentiation. So it's good, as a regular ed teacher, these are helpful for me to look at. So thank you for that example.
Yes, of course.
Jenny, does that help you? Because I would like to go back to Janet's question, because we have Ricky Scott available now. But
yes, that helped for further understanding there. So thank you. Yes.
Okay, great questions. Ricky Scott, are you available to help us out?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes. Would you like Janet to repeat her question?
I would love that. Thank you.
I bet Janet would do that. Janet?
Thank you. Good morning, Ricky.
Hi, Janet.
My question was, can you tell us where the Utah standards would be unique from what dynamic learning maps are offering us in terms of standards? I was just wondering, we're going to be writing some specific standards, especially for Utah, and I wondered if you could just give us some examples of where Utah standards will be unique and what this stakeholder group will be writing.
Wonderful. So when we wrote our 6-8 standards, we spent a lot of time on this originally. And there are a couple places where the seed standards add a little more clarity and a little more depth in some of these standards and how they're written now. So when it comes to some of the changes that we're looking at, we're just trying to add that same equal depth that exists in the seed. Some of these standards, for example, they're really kind of pared down. And so we're just going to try to add a little more depth, I guess is the answer.
Janet, do you have a follow-up with that, or does that help?
That helps. Can you give us an example, Ricky?
So off the top of my head, I'm trying to think of an example with 6-8 because this is really where we took them. So where we started with 6-8, and again, this is a very special group of children, right?
Right.
And so what we looked at with 6-8, I'm getting a lot of feedback. I don't know where that's coming from. Sorry. But when I looked with 6-8, we found places, for example, where we were really just looking for access points. So I'm trying to think of a specific example. Again, this was back in 2017 that we did this work. So I'm sorry, I can't think, I'm trying to think of a specific example, but I think the biggest thing is when it comes to this, it's the three-dimensional depth, I guess, is the biggest thing I can give. So the lowest access point where we're looking at is really looking at a kid's ability to be able to recognize like the parts of the science content. And then we start building up a little bit in their content and their understanding of maybe sense-making depth, right? So for example, like how do patterns play into this, or how does cause and effect play into this? And we start getting a little bit deeper into being able to actually do some functional practices that scientists use. And this is where I'm most excited about these standards, is that it gives these kids access to being able to create some models, right? Which is what scientists do. Maybe engage in some investigations that are appropriate for this group of students. But I think that's really where I'm most excited about where this work goes, is giving that depth in those ways. If that answers. A specific example of a standard, I mean, we did it to just about all of them. So, I mean, we did it in the world of geology, right? We did it in some chemistry. We did it. So there's a lot of different places where it happened content-wise with 6-8. And the same thing will happen here. We'll look at the standards. We'll look at some access points for the kids and be able to give them those appropriate points to be able to not only get the content, but get the depth that we're hoping out of the seed standards.
Yeah, Ricky, it sounds like depth is kind of overarching, and these individual ones will address things like that and give all kids the opportunity to go deeper. And I don't know, they sound fun to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thank you for that, Ricky. Your enthusiasm comes through, and I like reminded about we want children thinking like scientists, and we want to give them an opportunity to explore these things. And I think even for cognitively handicapped kids, that's an exciting prospect. So thank you.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry I couldn't be more specific. To me, it's just like there's so many of them that I could just, I don't know. I hope that helps.
Yeah, it does help. Thank you, Ricky. And I see, Tanya, you have your hand up. I didn't know if you wanted to join in on this conversation before we move to a next question. It could be that her hand was left up.
I do.
Okay, great. Oh, well, I thought I heard someone. Well, let's...
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Is that you, Tanya?
Okay. Sorry. Yes.
Okay.
I believe, Ricky, that board member Cannon was asking that I wasn't able to answer was about Utah-specific standards that were different. And I don't want to speak for you, board member Cannon, but that were different than some of the NGSS type standards. So what would an example of a Utah-specific seed standard be? So that was what I thought you were asking, board member Cannon, and I thought Ricky might be able to give an example of something that's different, Utah versus national.
Oh.
I did ask that, Tanya. You're right.
Tanya, way to keep us on track. Ricky, never mind, don't go away. Do you have a response to that?
Yes, I clicked the wrong button and I couldn't find my my mute button. So a specific example, for example, I'm trying to pull some so I can see them up in front of me. For example, in this example, in 5th grade, we're looking at LS 2.1. So this is in NGSS, this is a 5th grade standard, develop a model to describe the movement of matter amongst plants and animals and decomposers. So that same thing in our seed standards in 5th grade. Give me a second, let me pull it up to see the example. So this in our seed standards talks about looking, I think the difference that we add here in this one is that we're talking about emphasizing specific matter cycles. Like, so we kind of give a little more depth. One of the problems that we found with NGSS is that it's very simple and dry, where we're like, teachers are asking, what do they mean? And so with the seed standards, we added some more depth of being like, in this case, what we're really looking at specifically is just emphasize matter cycles and looking between air and soil and things like that. So that's really the difference in this one. There are other ones that are a little more significant where NGSS went one direction and we split them into two, for example, or maybe there's one that we thought was really simple and we're like, we'll just bring that into another one and join them into one. But looking at the content again, that's really, I guess, an example of how we add that depth as well in the content to give also specificity to teachers.
Thank you. Janet, you good?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay. All right. Thanks, everyone, for answering those questions. I think Board Member Hanson has a question.
I do. Thank you. Don't know if I'm coming through this morning. Have I got my internet problems sorted out? My question is probably a basic one. So I know these are directed towards our special ed kids. And there's also an assessment that goes with that. I'd like to hear a little bit about the assessment. And then also, Tanya kind of touched on this, but I see some application in this maybe in our general ed classrooms. I wondered if there's any crossover, if there's any kids that would be maybe taking both assessments, trying to take the general ed assessment and this one, or a general ed kid that was not doing well that would maybe benefit from this, or the assessment would tell us something. Can you just comment on that?
Yeah, Tanya, will you go ahead and address those issues?
We've invited Tracy Gooley, who's our alternate assessment person, wonderful specialist in the special ed department here today. We invited her specifically because we thought some assessment questions might come up. So if you guys are okay with that, I think Tracy could answer this wonderfully.
Of course. Thank you. Tracy?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, sound great.
Hi, I am Tracy Gooley. I'm the Special Education Assessment Specialist. So I think Tanya explained I am the point person over our alternate assessments for our students with significant cognitive disabilities. And if Board Hanson, if we could have you repeat those questions, I think there was like 2 or 3 kind of mixed in there.
Yeah, Board Member Hanson, why don't we just start with one at a time? I mean, there were a lot.
Sure. Yeah, first, I'd just like to understand how that assessment works and how it compares with the assessment that our general ed kids would have. That's the first question.
Okay, so the alternate assessment, dynamic learning maps, as Tanya explained earlier, so it is in federal regulations that our alternate achievement standards are aligned to our gen ed standards. So that assessment assesses content on the alternate achievement standards, and it is still computer adaptive assessment that students log on. There are 5 within our Ela and Math Assessment. There are 5 different access points that students can enter into that assessment. So being like from an easy, medium, hard type level. Some students may log on and independently go through the assessment. Right now, Ela and Math is made up of anywhere from 5 to 7 testlets. And within those testlets, there's about anywhere from 5 to 10 questions that a student may answer. There are also all the way down to that initial precursor level, which you can see as an example here in the science. Those testlets may be more of a paper-based, or the student may not interact necessarily with the computer. They may interact with the teacher and manipulatives and doing things like that, and then an answer gets inputted into the assessment system. So one of the differences with science is, and Tanya explained that DLM is in what they're calling phases of expanding their science. So right now they only have those 3 access points, where we're used to seeing 5 access points in our EL and math. So that's one of the areas that they're looking at expanding, is that those target levels, those access points for students. So I don't know if that answered your question.
Scott, do you want to follow up with that? And then if that answers, go ahead and move to your next question.
Thank you. Now that helps me understand how the assessment works. I appreciate it. Have we, and maybe this is a question that goes across some boundaries, but I can see maybe an example of a general ed student who's not doing well, maybe failing on standard assessments in a given subject. Do we ever use these assessments to see where they are as a diagnostic, or is that something that would have any value?
Yeah, that is a great question, and the answer to that is no. So it is very specific that alternate assessments are for students with a significant cognitive disability. And so a student has to be identified as having that significant cognitive disability and then also requiring the need for instruction in our alternate standards in order to show that progress and measurable gain in their grade level curriculum. So these assessments are specifically targeted very much for that specific population.
Okay, thank you. Scott, do you have a follow-up? Yeah.
I have just one more, and then that can move forward, I think. Going back to what Ricky mentioned to us, I just wonder if, so DLM has a set of essential elements for science already. That's correct, right?
Yes.
And we're going through this effort now to develop some additional standards, or doing some additional work to align it more perfectly with the Utah standards. And I'm just wondering, given the more basic nature of the essential elements, and I haven't really heard the examples, concrete examples of what has to be done. We're just saying more depth. Is the effort something that's worthwhile? Is it going to have measurable results when we do it? Is it really going to improve the experience for our students, or tell us anything? Have we looked into that, or are we just saying, hey, they don't align perfectly, and so we need to do the work?
I think that is also a great question, and Tanya or Ricky can jump in at any point. I think the intent of that for us was knowing that, one, Tanya and I are not the science experts. That's why we rely on Ricky and Melissa and teaching and learning to help with that. So our understanding is that when Utah created their general ed seed standards, that there were a few, what that number is, I'm not 100% sure. We haven't quite done that crosswalk yet, but that there are a few very specific standards that Utah wrote for science that are outside of the national standards. And so, one, our students would not be tested on those because it's not part of the Dynamic Learning Maps Consortium. But however, we still want our students to receive instruction in those standards. So that was the goal when the work group came together, was we still want to be able to provide the robust set of standards for our students, but knowing that very specifically as far as the assessment is concerned, it is tied directly to DLM's standards. Does that answer your question?
Scott, do you want to go ahead and comment?
I'll keep going, I guess. So if I'm understanding correctly, then we're going to teach maybe more in depth and with some of these concepts that come from the Utah standards, but the assessment won't be modified to pick up those new elements. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. And then is this included in the contract that we have with DLM for the other work they're doing for us, or is this a separate effort that we're putting on? And if so, how much is it? What's the scope of it? How much does it cost?
Right. So that's another great question. So no, it is not in the contract with DLM. That would be something that they wouldn't do. So anything in addition that we wanted to do outside of their standards would be on us. And as far as the scope, I'm going to toss that one back to Tanya.
Tanya?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, so just to clarify, so Board Member Hanson, us adopting their standards is included in the contract. Is that correct, Tracy?
Yes, to adopt the standards.
Yes, so we're not having to ask for anything more regarding that. But DLM will not be at this point. They won't be involved in writing for those few Utah-specific seed standards that we're going to need to write for. That again won't be tested through DLM, but we still want our students to have access to those standards as well, and our teachers to have that really great format for reaching these students on those standards that DLM might be missing. So we do not. It is included in the contract to adopt the standards that are already existing, and as they expand, that will be included in our contract as well.
Okay, so this effort then, and I'm sorry, is that okay, Chair, just to follow up?
Go ahead, and we'll have an answer about specific costs coming up, so.
Okay, but this effort then is an in-house effort that we're talking about right now. This isn't, DLM's not involved, there's no add-on to the current contract for DLM to do this. Is that correct?
No. Yeah, no, that's correct. But I think another important thing to understand here is, as we're talking about a student population, with such complex needs, that was part of the reason why the work group really felt strongly about adopting what DLM has, is because students and teachers are both already so familiar with the format that DLM has for Ela and Math, which we've been using for several years. I think that was one of the big selling points for adopting DLM science standards. And with that, it just would be nice to be able to create something that is outside of they would all be Utah standards, but being able to make sure we still have something for teachers to instruct on those really specific Utah components, so that those students don't miss that as well.
I see. Yeah, and this adopting what DLM has looks like it makes good sense, and the format I really like. I mean, it's easy to understand, and it steps from basic to the target. I like the way they've laid it out. So thank you. That's helping me understand. If we do have any information on cost, let me know. Otherwise, I'll turn it over to the next board member.
I do want to say, Board Member Hanson, that staff is going to follow up with the cost of the DML contract. So look for that, and we'll have specifics there. Is that good?
Works for me. Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. The specifics, Jenny? Sorry, I missed that.
Yeah, we're just looking for specifics on cost. Staff said they would follow up with an email, but if you have specifics on cost, go ahead.
Oh, so the contract that was approved, right, that's tied specifically to DLM. So any work that we would do outside of that you wouldn't find that in the contract. So I just wanted to make sure you understood that. My apologies.
Yes, I do. They're two separate. One is going to be more in-house and one is through DLM, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah. Either way, we will follow up, or staff will follow up with an email to go into the specifics of cost. Scott, do you want the amount for the current contract for DLM too?
I'm sure that we approve that as part of our consent calendar, and I can go back and look at that as easy as staff can. So no problem.
Okay, well, we can get to you too. Darren Nielsen said he would be on it. So anyway, let's go. I think Board Member Marsh had a question.
Not necessarily a question. I was just ready to make a motion if you're okay with that, Madam Chair.
That is even better, Board Member Marsh. Go ahead.
Okay. Madam Chair, I would move that we forward a recommendation to the board to approve the adoption of the Dynamic Learning Maps Alternative Science Standards and approve the convening of a stakeholder group to write alternate achievement science standards that align with the new Utah-specific seed standards not addressed in DLM science standards.
Okay, the motion before the committee is a long one, but a good one. The motion is that the committee forward a recommendation to the board to approve the adoption of the Dynamic Learning Maps alternate science standards and approve convening a stakeholder group to write alternate achievement science standards that align with the few Utah-specific seed standards not addressed in DLM science standards. Do we have any discussion to that motion? Board Member Earl?
Yeah, my question has to do with what percent of the standards will be adjusted? In other words, how much, 25% of them will need to be looked at? Is it 5%? I'm actually curious because it says a few here, but I don't know what exactly that entails.
Who could answer that question for Board Member Earl?
I can do that. This is Tanya Semerad. I think that's part of what we need to do to pull together our work group and really take a good look at it. Again, Ricky Scott has provided me a crosswalk from the work that they did. And we know that DLM is also expanding their standards. So I think that's part of the work that we need to do to make sure that we just are not leaving out some of these standards for this population of students. So I'm sorry, Board Member Earl, there's not an answer to that right now, especially as things are expanding with DLM. But the way that we're seeing, I guess, at least the stakeholder group and USBE staff, is that we are excited after years and years and years of our teachers not having updated standards for students with significant cognitive disabilities. And DLM does have a jumping off point for us for this. And our teachers, hopefully in August, September, will now have standards that align with our USBE core standards that we've adopted. And then we need to pull this work group together to find out exactly what the work is. And we will follow that standards process that you all have laid out for us and that USBE staff has been working on as well to make sure that we do all the necessary work.
Okay, thank you. I was just wondering how intensive that was going to be and what that looked like. If it was just, well, if you've got the crosswalk and such, I'm sure it'll make that work easier. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any other discussion to the motion? Board Member Marsh, your hand's still up, but I don't know if it's left over from the motion or if you'd like to discuss. Oh, it just went down. Okay, seeing no other discussion, the motion before the committee is to forward a recommendation to the board to approve the adoption of the Dynamic Learning Maps alternate science standards and approve convening a stakeholder group to write alternate achievement science standards that align with the few Utah-specific SEED standards not addressed in DLM science standards. All those in favor, please vote. Okay, the motion passes unanimously. Nora Lee, good?
We're good.
Okay, thank you everyone. Thank you Tanya and Tracy and Ricky and everyone else who helped answer all those questions. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to our second item, which is the SHARP survey discussion. I know Brian Olmstead is going to be here to talk about it, as well as I think if we need Leah Voorhees. But this is something that, as you know, has been administered since 2003 as a combined effort to bring together the Utah Prevention Needs Assessment Survey and the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. It's conducted every other year. And the purpose of this is to have a discussion and then maybe take action on a resolution that was in Civic Clerk. So why don't I turn the time over to Brian Olmstead and have him kind of give us some background, and then we'll move into some discussion and hopefully some action.
Okay, am I on?
You are. Thank you, Brian.
You bet. You bet. Great to talk about the SHARP survey. So not sure how exactly we want to get into this conversation. There's a lot to talk about with the SHARP survey as we even look at specific items. I don't know that we want to do that today. We're doing that always in the planning committee with the SHARP survey. the board staff are involved in that, along with our partnering agencies. And I think that's important to remember and to mention that this is a joint effort of the Department of Health and the Division of Substance Abuse and Mental Health. And in fact, they actually fund the administration of the survey. So it's a big topic. It is every other year. We'll be administering the SHARP survey this spring of this coming school year. So the spring 2021 administration, it's on the odd year, 6th grade, 8th grade, 10th grade, 12th grade. So if you follow that process, it's the same students actually taking it every other year. And so it does well to show trends because it is the same population. As those students get older, then they take the survey 4 times if they stay in Utah that long. We hope they do. But I think I like as our conversations have, and we had a working group. Was that just last week or maybe 2 weeks ago? The COVID fog has me confused sometimes with the timeline. I was going to tell Ricky Scott that he needs to mention 2017 as 3 BC before COVID. But so yeah, things happened before COVID and then now. But so we have a lot of working conversations around the SHARP. Our partners are very interested in getting it right, maintaining the validity of the survey, right? There's a lot of effort to do that. But I think as we were drawing up documents for what action might be taken, we found that there is a policy about creating board resolutions. And so the resolution that is presented today is kind of the culmination of that work. I thank Board Member Earl, and I hope she can see that many of her suggestions are implemented into this, because I think it's appropriate. And I think it's wise for the board to do something like this that says, these are the principles we want to see, right? I think there's also an understanding that we don't control all of it, right? We don't get every decision in the process, but we do have a say in the process. And so the board resolution probably needs some tweaking. It's draft. It's maybe version not quite 1, but version 1.1. And so, if we get this right, and then as staff takes this under our arm, right, we take this to our planning meetings, and as we abide by the resolution, I think we can get our guiding principles implemented into the survey, and we can do well. I personally think the survey is important. I was in the local LEA. I was involved in the administration of it, and it's great. A lot of good information, a lot of good and local information, especially as you participate completely in the survey, which is an LEA choice, and that's another thing to remember. And we've put that into the resolution as well, that this is all very much up to local decision to participate, and then that's at the LEA level, and then at the individual level, every student needs active parental permission to participate. This survey is not administered just because you showed up today, right? You have to show up today with your permission slip, and that's the way you participate in the survey. But I'm happy to ask or answer any questions, and maybe we just start looking at the resolution. But I hope that's a good place to start.
That's a great place to start. And just speaking as a teacher, I have to tell you that, with a lot of things I do as a teacher, it's like, we're going to do this, but with the SHARP survey, it took some time. I mean, as from a teacher to I had to send things home. And even if a student forgot, I could not administer that SHARP survey to the student. I had to have a signed piece of paper from a parent in order for them to even take it. So, I mean, I appreciate that, even though it takes a little bit of extra effort, but it really relies on parents to opt in to do that. So, the other thing I really appreciate that this leads to a deployment of resources. I think that's probably the most important thing for me, is how this survey really helps us get what we need for our kids. So, and then Brian, before we start the discussion and ask questions, I just wonder if you could highlight a few of the things that are in this resolution for our listeners and just for the committee, just to see what we have what's been put into the resolution.
Yeah, well, I think it starts with the purpose. I thought that was important. So, the purpose of the survey is to assess things, right? And assess things in order to then help us predict. Because we're talking about, whenever you're talking about prevention, to a degree, it's guesswork, right? There's this space that we all operate in, and so to the best of our ability, we want information that will help us program correctly. And so the purpose is important. The next thing is that it is a collaborative effort of 3 state agencies, and that's important to remember. The in the resolution is that the participation is by active parental consent and a voluntary decision by each LEA. That's not up to question, right? Should never be and isn't. And so then as we look towards guiding principles, I thought it's important to highlight that the survey should be guided by efforts towards validity and honesty. And there are checks and balances actually within the survey, and it kind of gets technical. But as the surveys are built, there are ways to determine if a person is being honest. And the last question even asks them, how honest were you in completing this? And that's their chance to kind of come clean and at the end and not vary. And when they say that, their surveys are discarded. They're set aside, not included. I think another guiding principle that's in this resolution is, as other surveys are coming together in our community, our education community, we need to make sure that we're not duplicating items across surveys. There's no reason to ask the same thing twice, right? And so as new surveys come on, and some are legislatively mandated, and so as all of that happens, we need to recognize that and try to avoid duplication. I taught to, and this I think Board Member Earl could speak to this probably better than myself, that we're trying to seek now a way to bring in protective factors, because there's a risk conversation and there's a protective conversation. And the survey traditionally is very heavily risk-based, but we believe there's ways in a protective way to prepare questions that speak to the protective factors that exist. Also, we have in here avoid the possibility of advertising a product or brand. We don't want to do that. We don't want subliminal messaging, right, to be woven in a survey. We want to be very careful with that. And a proactive message. I think that's important. I think that as we develop questions over time, we can have a positive message as well as a negative. Sometimes it's a negative concept, right? Sometimes these are depressing things that we're talking about that we need to kind of drill down a little deeper into. But there are also positive things that we can do, and so that's I guess let me end with this to speak to anyone who can't see this. We also have, I put in here that that it's further resolved that the board urges the planning committee, beginning with the 2023 administration, to encourage 100% participation in online administration. And I'll speak quickly to having been an LEA assessment director when we moved from paper-based testing to computer-based testing. We kind of had to have that line drawn in the sand. We needed that moment where we were going to make the shift, because shifts are difficult. And sometimes you're hesitant to get there. But I think we need to say this needs to be 100% online, because the online technology allows you to survey in different ways than the paper pencil version. And so I felt like that's important, and that can be talked about whether that makes it to the final version or not. But so that's those are some of the elements that are in the resolution that we'll be discussing.
Thank you, Brian. I really appreciate you going through that. Board Member Hanson, you have questions or discussion items?
I do, thanks. First question, and maybe I'll get an answer to that, and then I'll ask some other ones, but why, we've been doing this since 2003. We've never done a resolution. We haven't done a resolution this year, and I think maybe we did one last year. Why do we need a resolution? What's the purpose, or what's calling for us to have a board resolution on this subject right now?
So as we've worked internally as a working group and worked with some individual board members, I think the interest in how the questions are developed and the message brought from the state board to the larger planning committee, I think this is kind of this was landed on as it's allowed in policy. It's a practice that you're right, has not been exercised often, but is a way to make a statement. So I think generally that's just where we landed as a good way to express our concerns and desires on how the survey is created and administered.
Yeah, that's a great question, Scott. Go ahead, follow up.
Yeah, if I could follow. So who is putting this forth? Is this coming from staff? Is this coming from a certain committee? And if so, which committee is it, or which group? But who's putting forth this resolution? Why is this on our agenda?
I think, let's see, I'm not sure how to answer that. I know the board leadership asked for the SHARP survey to be an item on today's committee meeting. And so I guess in my own workings to create that agenda item and my questions, well, what would that look like? What would it be? This is where it's landed, and I've created the draft that's in front of you from all of my collective work with the SHARP survey. So I guess this is my answer to the request for the board to take action. I feel like this would be appropriate action. Our action can't be, we don't approve the survey, yes or no. We don't pay for the administration, yes or no. So where is our action as a board? And so as your staff, I guess this approach, this avenue was my best way to take action.
So this is in front of us because of a request from Chair Huntsman or Vice Chair Cummins.
Correct.
That's how that on the agenda.
Right.
Yes.
To clarify that, we can have Dr. Norman speak to that. And I think Patty, are you available right now?
I am. So there were some questions from some board members, and there's been questions in the past. In fact, the SHARP survey has been on an agenda, I think, almost every year as we go through, because what is the role of the board? What is the role of the other agencies that are committed to making this work happen? And what are the roles of the schools? And since there were so many different players in the creation of and in deciding on questions and then what the rollout looks like, it was decided that perhaps the board can look at it through principles. What are the principles that the board agrees upon with the guardrails that have been set in place? And so that's where we were asked by board leadership to create something that might speak to the principles of the SHARP survey, and therefore Brian Olmsted went ahead and had that group come together and talk about what some of those points were. And Brian, can you speak to the board members that were on that committee again?
Yes, we had Chair Kravitz was there, Board Member Earl, and Board Member Thorpe had all expressed interest, and so they were at the working committee. We also had Department of Health, the division, Mary Johnston from Bach Harrison. They are the contracted entity to create and distribute and manage the SHARP Survey Administration. And then a number of our prevention specialists from my prevention team.
Okay, so again, I guess I'm just trying to figure out, after 17 years now of doing this, we think that we need to have some sort of a board resolution, and we're choosing to do a resolution instead of a board rule, which would be binding on LEAs. Resolution just says this is what we think. It's more aspirational. Can you help me understand that? Are there specific problems that we need to be fixing, or do we just want to make a statement? And if, I guess the problem I'm having is we don't do these resolutions very often. If we do, it's something that's generally very important that we think we need to make a statement on. And I'm trying to understand why we need to make a statement about this right now, and why not some other format of communication. If there's a problem, why not fix it with a rule?
Thank you, Board Member Hanson. I think it's a really great discussion, and I think Dr. Norman would comment on that.
That is a great question. In fact, that is the reason why it was brought to committee today, is for you as board members to decide what is needed. Is it a resolution that is needed that puts the guardrails in place and then also speaks to the principles that the board would like to see, or is it indeed a rule that would still have the similar guardrails within there and being binding? So there's not a lot of wiggle room for what the board can and cannot do. So it would kind of just be a restatement of what is already within the contracts and the design of it. So it wouldn't be new information that would be going into a rule. And so that is the reason why it was brought to committee, is for the board to decide where would you like for this to go.
Right, and I think that's what it says. It's a discussion or action, because, you know, as a committee, maybe as a committee, you don't feel like it needs anything, or maybe you feel like it does need to be a resolution. So that's for us as a committee to decide that.
And I'm just really trying to draw out, what is the problem that we're trying to fix? What is the specific problem? Is there some perception that the board is not behind the SHARP survey, or what's the problem where we need to make a big statement like this? There are many other things out there that we haven't made statements on. So why do we need to make a statement on this?
Well, and maybe that goes to, are there any committee members here that would like to talk about the problem? Because some of us might not see a problem, others of us might. And so I'm wondering if someone would be willing to speak to that. I don't know if we have Board Member Cannon's hand up, and as well as Board Member Earl. I don't know who went first, maybe Earl. Jenny, would you speak? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I can speak to a couple of this, because there were, Scott, when we met a week ago, there were about, I have about 14 items that I had specific questions and concerns on, or things that I was interested in having addressed. I can go over each one of those if you want. It might take a little time. And quite honestly, this is the first time I've gone all the way through the resolution. When I checked on Wednesday, it wasn't there, at least when I checked. And so I hadn't gone through it until just prior to the meeting. So I think it's just trying to address items of concern, and I could go into specific reasons on most of these if you'd like. If are you asking for something stronger teeth-wise, or I'm just trying to understand if there's a direction you'd like to go. There are things I think we could address better, as specifically the prevention into this. Let me just give you one example for, let me see if I can find my statistics here. So like on the SHARP survey, Form B 2020, which it would be coming up this next year, there's 23 questions from the risk factor perspective on how a student perceives themselves or self-harm. And there were, I found 0 of those from a protective factor on self-perception. And so that kind of a thing is what I'm hoping we can send a strong message that we need to be looking at those protective factors and not just simply measurement of the risk factors. Yes, we need some of that risk factor so that we can have an accurate data collection there, but it's also coming at it from a protective factor element as well.
Jenny, I know you said you had about 14 things or something you wanted to go through. I'm wondering, just maybe to help Board Member Hanson out and the committee out, if you could just say maybe in general your concerns, okay, and then we can move to Board Member Cannon and then kind of go back and forth. And I want to see if that helps Board Member Hanson, because I think ultimately we want to decide, does this warrant a resolution? Does it warrant nothing? I mean, and what are the parameters that we can even control where this is this is a group effort? Okay, go ahead.
Sure. And okay, I'll just hit a couple of these. One of those, and that does, be it further resolved, that element at the very bottom does address the idea that we can simplify both the time and the survey itself. If a student has never smoked, there's questions that wouldn't need to be asked, right? Where did you buy your cigarettes? How frequently do you purchase them? In the last 30 days, how often? So there's, especially with the online format, so there's a simplicity to that. There's questions that are in a declarative, written in a declarative form. When I'm an adult, I will. So that the resolution addresses that. Also, using specific titles or names of products. In this particular survey, in Form B 2020, it uses the term or the name Juul over and over again. So just being careful to make sure it actually isn't doing advertising, but providing insights into the usage of products. So just checking on that. Let me see if the other page here. Just trying to skip real quick. Anyways, so it's just kind of trying to hit some of those general items in such a way that we're making this the best that it can be if we're going to administer it. So I don't know if you have additional questions or if Janet does.
Okay, that really helps. And let me go. I want to see what Board Member Cannon's thinking, and then I want to go back to Brian to clarify something, and then I want to see where Board Member Hanson is. So Janet.
Thank you. I had written down the exact same question that Board Member Hanson asked. Why do we need to do this now, seeing as how it's been in use since 2003? But I had some additional questions. The first one, is SHARP Utah specific, or do other states use this survey?
Brian, do you want to answer that?
Yes, this is Utah specific. It is correlated to some national questions and concepts that are inside of it, but the administration is Utah specific.
All right, thank you. Then another question is, we're told that these results predict problem behaviors, inform programs, deploy resources, track trends. So my question is, who takes all of this data and analyzes all of this state-specific data, and then how are the results used to inform programs and deploy resources? So by doing this, are we then analyzing this data and getting back to schools and giving them some help in terms of what we've discovered about the students at that school? Is this a helpful thing to them, Or is this something they just participate in and then they never hear anything back about it?
But that's a great question. It's actually their data. So the superintendents of the districts, the executives of charters, they actually own their own data. So at the state level, we see the state perspective, but at the locals that participate, that choose to participate, and then the volume at which they participate is also up to, they have that question as well. So some do what we call whole population, and so then their data is very informative of trends and things at their level. The Department of Health and at the division, they can take the data and they can create community level perspectives. And so there are lots of ways to use the data, but in the education environment, it is used by the locals. And I could speak, just recently we competed for gang prevention and intervention funding. And some of the very good local data that we asked LEAs to provide was their SHARP survey data and showing trends and different perspectives and pulling out their own data. So it's a local view.
And Janet, I will speak personally because in my area where I teach, we have a huge issue with vaping. We keep the data at our school. We use that data to help us get some vape detectors in our restrooms. Like, these things are being used practically, and we use that data to help us say, there is a need, can you help us? So the deployment of resources is wonderful.
Oh, thank you, Jenny. Can I just further ask, are there state level resources that go behind this, or are these resources that the locals have to come up with to work on these things? Where are these resources coming from?
So again, very, very local decision making here, but I could speak to one source of state funding that we provide at the state board is the EARS funding, the Enhancement for At-Risk Students. So that's LEA money that then the LEA prepares a plan, and they not always, because it's according to their desires, but they will cite, some of them will cite SHARP survey data as to why they are planning to spend that money in a certain way. And so they can speak to maybe one or two schools, right? That in their LEA, if you survey at sufficient level, you can identify problems within a school. You can identify problems over the entire LEA. And so they can use those funds, which are sometimes quite significant. And so those are state level funds. Others have secured grants. I know some federal grants. Our state federal grants, called the AWARE grant, I believe we use state level data from the SHARP survey as we wrote for that and received funding of a 5-year program. But there's lots of ways to use the data, both state and locally, and to access different resources. And Board Member Cannon, I hope that got to your question.
Yes, thank you. That's very helpful. I'm glad to know that all the effort put forth in taking this survey and getting parent permission to do this survey, that the data is being put to good use. Thank you.
And Brian, while we have you there, I just wanted to speak to or ask you to clarify some things. So what is under the board's purview and what isn't? So for example, could the board say to a local LEA, no, you cannot take the SHARP survey, or help us understand that, what our role is in this?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm probably going to stumble my way through the answer because it gets very complicated in that, and I'll go scenarios, right? Say the state board says we would rather have you not participate, but a local board could say, no, we want to participate. We like it. And so they could contract directly with the survey administrative entity, which is Bach Harrison right now. And because, again, it's funded through Department of Health, the Division of Substance Abuse and Mental Health. It's used by, we were only talking about how education uses the data. Yeah. There are lots of ways other entities, Department of Health and the division, as well as community coalitions. And so there'd be lots of reasons why an LEA would say, well, thank you, State Board, for your, saying we shouldn't, but we feel like we should. And so because we don't have that space right now, I believe, to take action saying thou shalt not, right? I don't know. So does that help?
That helps. It's so complicated, but I just know that you know it better than we do, and you get the nuances. And that's why we're in this hard space, is we can say these are guiding principles that we believe in. I want to go back.
Could I just follow on that one? Jenny, could I just follow on your question quickly?
I'm just going back to you. I wanted to go back to you and get your thoughts on the discussion, because you kind of started it all.
Thank you. I just wonder, Brian, so if I understand this right, Division of Health and Human Services and their Substance Abuse and Mental Health Division, they're the ones who fund this. Is there some statutory mandate? Are they obligated to do this? And do they control then the content of the test? They're the ones who contract with Bach Harris and develop the test. Is that right?
So we create the survey together. So there's a planning committee of the agencies that are all partnered in here. And so we are creating, but again, so parts of the survey come from larger national perspective. Prevention needs assessment, a PNA is one that many of the questions are patterned after that and used in similar surveys across the nation, so that you can get actually regional and national trends and perspectives on things. I'm going to say I'm just knowledgeable enough to be way too dangerous in this, but the Department of Health, I believe they have some federal funding, and it might be the division, but it could be both of them. Some federal funding is contingent upon the administration of a survey of this type. So it serves their purposes, it serves our purposes. I mentioned the community coalitions that exist. They exist because they can say, hey, this is a problem. So they get resources based off of it. A lot of people are using the survey for their own things, and it just helps that it's all the same survey, rather than all of us trying to do our own.
Sure. So how much pull do we have is the ultimate question with the Department of Health, or when we sit in this committee I'm reading the resolution. It says the Department of Health, Substance Abuse and Mental Health, and the State Board of Education. So 3 entities, but 2 of those entities are very closely aligned, because substance abuse and mental health is part of the Department of Health. How much can we do in that setting? If we wanted to change questions and things, can we dictate that, or do they?
Yeah. So 2 years ago, I want to say, no, more than that now, the BC thing. We asked from our board, we asked for questions to be not as leading, and so they changed very much the wording of the question, right? That and how they were written. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of we have a lot of say in that. It's administered in our schools, right? So I think they have a strong desire that we be a great participant, that we're comfortable with the survey. Certainly, I know there are certain things that this has to be stated this way, because it's a researched cluster, right? You'll kind of walk down a certain question path, right? And I've asked, well, why is that like that? And they said, well, because that whole set of questions has a lot of research behind it, that it gets to the right answer, that you can make decisions and you can make, it's research based. You're not just curious, right? There's curiosity questions, but then there's also, no, this is research based. It's getting to the root of a problem. And so, that's where, and that's that give and take that happens in any committee.
So I'm just still struggling a little bit as to maybe the purpose and who the audience is for this resolution. Are we connecting this to the Division of Substance Abuse and telling them, hey, this is what we want you to do? And if so, why not just do that in the meetings? If it's to try and coalesce what the board thinks, we could do that, but it would only be valid for a given set amount of time, because next year we could have a bunch of new members on the board and they can all come in and say, hey, we don't believe that. And then we got another resolution that we've got to repeal this and come up with another one.
Yeah, we head a different direction.
I just wonder why maybe we're not just focusing on the current SHARP survey and looking at it and saying, these are the specific issues we have as a board. And then taking that to Division of Health and saying, we'd like these changes to be made. Would that accomplish what we need?
I think the timing of this as a resolution is kind of unique in the 17-year administration, right? That we've talked about. I think we have the ability to pivot to the online administration. I think we also have the concern that there are other surveys that now legislatively need to happen, right? A school climate survey is now required. And so that takes us back to being non-duplicative in our efforts, which has never been really in place before. And then also the idea of a positive bent and a protective bent to some of our questioning, that maybe we can get to the same issue by speaking positively, and then the absence of the positive is the presence of a negative, right? And so
you're jumping way ahead of me, Brian. I'm still how do we accomplish what we want to accomplish? I'm not arguing the details of what's in this resolution. I'm just wondering, why a resolution? Why not just talk about this in the meeting that we have with these folks and get some of this resolved? We're thinking the board isn't united on these things, and we don't have the authority to take that to the meeting, or is that the problem we're trying to solve?
Brian, do you want to comment on that? And then I want to step in for just a minute after Brian.
I'll back off. I'm sorry. I'm
actually thinking that's a question for the board members on the committee, and not a question for staff to answer.
Right. That's what I was saying. Now, I want to just like a technical question just for committee, just to remind that resolutions are good for 5 years. They can be amended at any time. And then also just doing a time check for this discussion. I don't want to spend more than 10 more minutes on this, because we do have one more item. And this is either a discussion or an action. And if we don't take action within 10 minutes, then we don't take action. So just want to keep that in mind for committee members. Board Member Earl, I think you have a question, comment, or motion.
Well, yes, I think this is a good way to go, but I can kind of see what Scott's saying, because he's saying, why can't we just, if we want something, just do that? I guess as this committee meets, because we do have a say on it, and we have had a say in the past. It's not like we're just bystanders and they come in and into the school and administer the survey. That's not the case. We use the data, we use the information, and so I think it keeps it broad enough and hits key points that I actually do like the resolution. But I don't know. I think I will make a motion. I'll make a motion that we approve the resolution number. Do I just say 2020-1, or do you want me to give the specific name for it?
I think it's okay to say just the resolution concerning the SHARP survey.
Okay, so I make a motion that we approve the resolution concerning the SHARP survey.
Okay, so we have a motion before the committee, and the motion is that we forward a resolution concerning the SHARP survey to the board for adoption. Do we have any discussion to that motion? Board Member Hanson.
I'll just speak briefly against the motion, mainly for the fact that we haven't discussed the content of the resolution in any detail in this committee meeting. So I'll be voting no. If we're going to go ahead with the resolution, I think we need to spend significant time talking about the details, and maybe that's my fault. I've been talking about whether this is the right avenue or the right way the right method to go forward. But without talking about the detail of the resolution, I'd be very uncomfortable passing that on to the full board.
No, don't feel like anybody's words are unnecessary. I think all of this discussion is important. So thank you, everyone who's making discussion. Dr. Norman, you had your hand up, and I wanted to just check and see if you had something to add.
Sorry, I hadn't put it down.
Oh, well, hello to you. Board Member Cannon.
Yes, so now I feel conflicted. I'm kind of getting to the point where I'm liking this a little better, but I'm persuaded by Board Member Hanson's notation that we really have not discussed the resolution. So I'd like to amend the motion to bring this back next month with a discussion that focuses on what is in the resolution of the SHARP survey.
Okay, so we have an amendment to the motion to bring it back to committee and essentially discuss it in more detail, the specifics of the resolution, correct?
Correct.
I don't know, Board Member Earl, would you consider that a friendly amendment?
Absolutely. I think that's completely appropriate. I think this deserves plenty of dialogue so that we're headed in the direction we want to go. So yes.
Okay, and let me just check in with staff. Is that, I mean, I don't get the sense this is not a time sensitive thing, but do we have any staff members who could make sure that would be okay? That's something we could bring back?
Chair Gravitt, this is Deputy Superintendent Norman. We'll make sure it gets brought back. Can I get a little bit more detail on what is being asked? Is what's being asked just more time for discussion, or would you like more information from staff? And if so, what is that information you'd like to have us gather to be prepared?
Okay, so I will add what I have heard, and then if committee members have something else, please speak up. So my understanding is that we just need more time because we've been discussing like, why are we doing this, etc. But now we need to actually discuss what is in the resolution itself. So we just need more time for discussion. Committee members, do you have specific things that you would like staff to be prepared with? Okay, I'm not seeing any, so it sounds like we just want more time. And so, Board Member Cannon, you had something to add?
Yes, I would. I'm a little baffled about this being a resolution, and so I would like a little background on what other state board resolutions are and why this particular item is deserving of falling into the category of a state board resolution.
Thank you. I think that's a great question.
Jenny?
Yeah, go ahead.
Excuse me, Chair. If I could just get specifics on, I know we have these guiding principles here, but if we could get specific examples of those, that would be helpful. You know, of where there's
I agree with you. There was one that I wanted some more specific, like the careful use of declarative items. I needed some more clarification on that. So, Patty, does that give staff some direction?
Yes, thank you. We'll be prepared.
Okay. Anybody else want to comment on what they would like staff to be prepared on? Okay, so then we have the amended motion before the board is that we will bring this discussion about the resolution concerning the SHARP survey back to committee. I'm just going to leave it as back to committee. I'm not going to set a specific month just in case because we don't know how things are going, if that's okay. So all those in favor, go ahead and click your check mark, please. Okay, that motion passes unanimously. Norlie, you got it? Is there anything else you need from us?
Yep, that's what I was going to check.
Okay, thank you so
Got
much.
it.
Oh, yes. And then Board Member Earl said if you didn't see in the chat box that she can send her notes onto committee members. I would love that. And I'm sure all committee members would appreciate that as well, because that'll give us some background to go with. So Brian, thank you so much. Committee members, thank you for that discussion. We will continue this.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Have a good weekend. Okay, let's move on to action item number 3, which is R277406. This is the Early Literacy Program and Benchmark Reading Assessment. This is an amendment, and I think it's just to help our LEAs have some more time in the situation we're dealing with. So I believe Darren Nielsen is going to talk to us about this and give us some background, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Yes, thank you. Again, my name is Darren Nielsen, Assistant Superintendent of Student Learning. And you're right, Chair, this recommendation is being brought to committee and the full board eventually, we hope, as a result of feedback we've received from our LEAs. As our LEAs are preparing, and some of them, as you know, have already completed their return to school plans and what their schedules are going to look like. This assessment has come up as a concern, not the assessment itself, but the time frame in which we typically ask the LEAs to complete the beginning of year benchmark assessment, which are required under R277406. This is an assessment that is relatively short and brief in its administration. Depending on the grade level and whether it's the beginning, middle, or end of year, the assessment time per student ranges from 3 to 11 minutes, which again doesn't seem like a lot of time. And in the past, we really haven't had LEAs struggle to meet the September 30th deadline for completing the beginning of year administration of this assessment. However, with the return to school plans, many LEAs are looking at having schedules where they don't have students present day after day, either split days or alternating days. And so they are expressing concerns in being able to meet that deadline. So as you'll see, we've made some recommended language changes. Again, we don't anticipate this being an ongoing problem, but specific to the beginning of year administration and potentially the middle of year administration and end of year administration. We're just requesting that the board allow the superintendent to her staff to work with these LEAs individually to adjust the deadline for their schools to complete that assessment. In addition to this requirement in this rule, each LEA under R277404 is required to submit a testing plan, an annual testing plan to the superintendent, and that plan includes their windows of administration. So there's a structure in place already for us to work with individual LEAs that may need an extension. In talking to the LEAs that I've spoken with, which include Alpine, Jordan, Park City, Canyons, and Davis school districts, as well as a few others that are slipping my mind right now, they believe that 2 weeks extension would be the most that any of them would need. Another thing that's unique to this test is it's administered in a one-on-one setting, either between the child's teacher and themselves, or between another educator in the building and the child, or in some cases, districts have assessment teams that travel from school to school and administer these assessments individually, but in large group settings. So again, in the context of the restrictions that we have in place to try to maintain as much safety and health in our schools as possible, the amount of time to complete this task is likely to extend beyond the September 30th deadline. And we're just simply requesting the board allow staff during this school year only the ability to work with those LEAs individually. That concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to respond to questions.
Thank you, Darren. What questions do committee members have for Darren about this? Board Member Hanson, go ahead.
Thanks. Darren, this is a complicated rule as I look through it. got a lot of different code sections and a lot of different things that need to be complied with. First off, I guess this is fairly time sensitive. We want to get this out quickly to the schools. Is that correct?
That's correct, because this is administered at the very beginning of the school year, typically. As you can see, the window is September 30th, but many schools start administering this right off the bat because there is significant value to the teacher from an instructional standpoint from this assessment, or this, what's also called a screener. We're able to get information about students' early literacy skills in a pretty quick way and allow the teacher to focus in on which students need additional supports right away to address any identified needs through that screener assessment.
Okay. I wondered, given that, probably good just to do this quick and dirty, I guess, and get something out. I did have some questions going through it about definitions and about, we've included the Acadians reading the name of the test in there. And in other cases, I think we've tried to eliminate that and pull it out to leave it more generic. Just a few other things like that. But if we just were to do the changes that you wanted to make right now and approve it, would it be beneficial to have a drop dead date for that first assessment so that it doesn't go back more than a month or something to put that in here? Because I can see a problem if we're supposed to have 3 assessments and their first assessment slides clear back into second assessment timing.
Yeah, I don't know that we would need to put the drop deadline in the rule. If the board authorizes staff to establish that on a case-by-case basis for the LEAs, I think we would still be able to meet the overall objective of this rule, and that is to get data for our students beginning, middle, and end of year. Again, this data is, of all the state assessments that we administer, and there's a few, as you folks are aware, this one seems to have as much value to teachers in their day-to-day instructional practice as any assessment. So it's not typical for us to see or experience resistance to administration of this particular assessment.
Okay, given that, thank you, Darren. I think it's best practice when we revise a rule, whenever we do that we go through it and get everything changed that we can. In this case, we probably don't need to do that. So I'll make a motion that we approve the rule as presented, draft 1, and then that we bring this rule back to clean it up, maybe when it's less time sensitive. Would that be acceptable to you, Darren, if we did that and then just bring this back to committee?
Yeah, I don't have any objection to that.
Okay.
I'll make that motion.
Okay, so let me make sure I have it right, Scott. And the motion is that we approve R277-406 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading, and that we also bring this rule back to clean up technical and other changes as needed. Is that okay, Scott?
Great. You said it better than I did. Thank you.
Okay. Do we have any discussion to that motion? Board Member Cannon.
Thank you. Just a question on the motion. Would it be draft 1 as amended? Because we are changing the dates in there to say that the superintendent shall determine the 2020 testing and reporting deadlines. Is that the amendment? So, or is that within draft 1?
I think that's within draft 1. Darren?
That's correct. That's contained in draft 1.
Okay.
I have a line on it. I apologize. Page 3 of the PDF. Yeah, right there where we're looking. That's contained in draft 1.
Thank you. May I ask just a couple of questions while we have Darren here?
Of course.
Okay. Thank you. The rule talks about using Acadians as the reading test, but it doesn't specify what the math test is.
Oh, Darren, will you address that, please?
Yeah, that's a great question. And as you know, or I'll just refresh for those who might be listening online. During the 2020 legislative session, there was a statute passed that would provide funding and also a requirement that LEAs administer this mathematics benchmark assessment, or a math screener test might be another way to reference it, similar to our reading. After the COVID-19 incidents with soft closure and the resulting financial challenges that our states face, the funding behind that was pulled off. Staff at the USB had begun the RFP, or request for proposal, process when we received direction to that we would likely not have funding to provide those assessments. So that RFP process was discontinued or put on hold until future notice. So we don't know who the vendor will be to that. And to Board Member Hansen's point, maybe it's best when we bring this back for further revisions that we pull out references to the actual vendors and just reference the reading and the mathematics benchmarks.
Janet, does that make sense?
Yes, that's very helpful. May I ask another question?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so who sets the benchmark scores? Or is this a benchmark that is statewide? And then tell me how to differentiate between a benchmark test and a formative assessment. Because this is like a pre-screener. We give information for teachers to help them plan. So differentiate that between benchmark and formative assessment.
Okay, great question. So within this product, they have two types of assessment. They have the benchmark, and then they have progress monitoring tools that go along with that. And so the progress monitoring tools that are aligned to those benchmarks in each grade level and the early literacy skills, teachers can administer progress monitoring and actually are encouraged to frequently administer progress monitoring tests to students who are receiving targeted interventions related to early literacy skills. The progress monitoring is probably more closely aligned with formative tools because it's built into when we talk about formative assessment, it's really, we need to think about a formative assessment process. There's not necessarily a test that's a formative test by itself. It's how the test is used to inform and create action on the teacher's behalf related to that. So the Acadience vendor provides the benchmark test, which gives us a quick screen and also establishes these timelines. So like this board rule talks about, we're looking for certain windows throughout the year where we can collect data that then we use. Well, first of all, the teachers and schools use it to track progress of cohorts of students as well as individual students within their classroom, within their school, and within their district as they evaluate their literacy programs and instructional practices. And then it also gives us information at the state level to provide additional support. The final benchmark that we administer, the end of year, is also data from that is collected and displayed on the school report card. While it's not calculated in the overall school accountability, that data is displayed, or the percent of students reading on grade level is displayed. I think you had another question, though, that I've forgotten.
It was who sets the benchmark? Is it a statewide benchmark? Is it a school level, district level benchmark? Who sets those benchmarks?
Okay, so the benchmarks, because the test is also administered in other states, these early literacy tests, previously the Dibbles, now we have Acadience, the vendor that we received this for, they have established those through psychometric practices to determine what is the cut score. I think is kind of what you're asking, or maybe others who are listening might be viewing it that way, that what's the cut score that determines these different thresholds within the reporting category or within the system of reporting on this. And those are done not specific to within the state of Utah, but through the entire delivery system and the vendor that provides the test. I've probably missed some details in there that we could bring in Sarah potentially, or one of our other literacy specialists, if you have more specific information that's needed about that.
Just a question. So the vendor sets the benchmarks. How widely used is this vendor? Is this across a number of states or just a few states, or?
Yeah, so let me provide a clarification. When I say the vendor sets the benchmark, they're responsible. They have a role in helping to establish that, but they use psychometric professionals to do that. This test, I don't know the number of other educational entities that use this test. Again, it started out as DIBELS, which I believe was associated with the University of Oregon. You'll note a lot of our tools that we use sometimes are tied back to research institutions where a lot of that heavy lifting is done to develop the tools. There was some legal action that caused them to separate. So it's essentially the same tool, which allows us to still have our same longitudinal data. Back when it was called DIBELS and Acadian. So it's the same tool. Now there's 2 vendors that provide that. So it's a significant number of entities that utilize that. I could get that information and share that with the committee if that's desired.
Well, I appreciate knowing that and knowing that it's sort of DIBELS with a new name, so it gives us longitudinal data. That's very helpful as well. Thank you, Darren.
Welcome.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the questions and for the answers. Board Member Marsh.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This test in a local LEA or a local district or a local charter school, I think, is so important to allow teachers to understand their student group that they have there. So I think I am very appreciative of Scott's motion that we are able to move it on so that we can work with the scheduling that's going to be different this year in order to get kids back into the school building. But yet I do think there are a couple of items that we ought to clear up and maybe take off the rough edges. So I'd be in support of this. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think especially this year, like I know in my district, I'm on a committee for unfinished learning, and we've talked about, I know it's a different age group, but just the benefit of having an assessment in those first 2 weeks so we can see where the unfinished learning is and we can address those issues right away. It's a good thing. Okay, let's see. I don't see any other questions, so let me remind the committee what the motion is. It's to approve R277406 Draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading, and then bring this back to our committee meeting another time for technical and other changes. All those in favor, please vote now. Or if you're not in favor, don't put a check. Okay, that motion carries unanimously. You guys, you finished with 7 minutes to spare. I always learn so much from you, and I always appreciate the discussion. Thanks everyone who makes it happen, and you guys have a great, great weekend.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, Jenny. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.